After being dry of any substantial Devil May Cry content for 5 years, a new anime by Adi Shankar and Netflix was recently released. And if you don't know, he is known for creating new animated shows in his bootleg universe, which is known for remixing and reimagining properties that he knows and loves. Some of it hated, some of it praised, but regardless of that, Devil May Cry was next in line. This show has been in the talks even before the release of Devil May Cry 5, but didn't begin production until 2022. I think people unfamiliar with Adi's works didn't expect him to embellish the story and characters they become attached to, so maybe they were expecting something totally faithful to the source material, and perhaps even more evident is his use of details taken from the Devil May Cry 3 prequel mangas, such as the inclusion of Enzo, Dante's former info broker before Morrison, and the humanoid white rabbit demon, along with all the Alice in Wonderland iconography the manga took influences from. I think many came into the anime wanting an animated version of the mangas, and with him apparently having hands on the Code Lady volume that had become lost media, it was exciting to think that fans would finally get more insight on Mary, since her backstory and origins had become in themselves a pretty nebulous rabbit hole. I'd be lying if I thought this wouldn't happen too. Even being cognizant of Adi's MO, I still waited with bated breath. What we got with the first season at least was a bit of half and half, where it sort of feels like a Frankenstein's monster of fan service and a mixture of canonical and non-canonical story beats spliced together. Regardless of my opinions of the story and other factors that go into making a great end product, what I want to hone in on in this video is any iteration of Devil May Cry's biggest factor, the portrayal of its Dante. Since Langdon has been relieved of his 15-year-long career of being Dante, it was up in the air who would take on such a sacred role. Since the anime takes place before Devil May Cry 3, where Dante was 19, it was evident they needed someone who could sound very youthful. Who else do we know from this property who portrays a young character? That's right, they got the voice of Nero, Johnny Young Botch, to portray this even more juvenile Dante. I mean, come on, Young is even in his name. Even if Langdon did reprise the role, it would be a pretty big ask to request that he sound like what he did 20 years ago, or something similar to it. Botch has shown that he can play a grandson of Sparta, but what about a son of Sparta? As you'd come to expect, the anime opens up with demons roaming the earth, hassling humans when suddenly Dante comes to their rescue. For clarity's sake, when I'm referring to this anime, I'll coin it ADMC, since there's another animated series before this one. We are introduced to this version of Dante taking care of business, and I remember when this clip surfaced, people took issue with Dante's mannerisms here, just out of the sake of subverting your expectations that we're supposed to meet this acclaimed badass, only to turn him into a joke that he's an oafish dork that tries hard coming up with quirky one-liners. Dante is known for his cheap quips, but usually he doesn't flounder them, and his charisma is enough to make them come off as charming. Even though I've actually found this particular scene charming in its own right, it still comes off as ill-fitting to Dante's character. Compared to all the other introductions we get from Dante, this one is the weakest and most awkward. I get that Dante's at his starting point and it's supposed to showcase his immaturity, but even in Devil May Cry 3, his immaturity was alleviated by the fact that you knew you still had a handle on things, even if the situation lacked coordination. In fact, one of Dante's defining characteristics is his ability to improvise in a given situation and go with the flow. It's something that came naturally to him, not something that he had to practice in the mirror to build up some persona. From the drop, Adi has already mischaracterized Dante to appease established TV tropes, which I'm sure was an intentional decision to let people know what they're getting into in terms of tone and direction. No matter how charming and well spoken Dante has traditionally been, he's still a rather aloof guy, keeping to himself mostly, but here he's just out and about and rather cavalier. I grasp the fact that he doesn't necessarily hold the baggage that will be handed to him later, but I would have never suspected I'd see him ever possess this golden retriever temperament. I chalk this change up to another character being a victim of flanderization, where you take that superficial image of that character and make that their whole being. Dante was arrogant in that their game to drown out the sorrow that he held internally. He acts in a similar fashion in the 4th and 5th games too, but it's justified because he had been pulled out of a funk after learning that there was more of Sparta's bloodline out there besides just himself. That could also potentially lead to some closure as to Virgil's whereabouts or current standing, Not to mention how much of a powerhouse he had become at that point. With the first episode leaving a pretty sour note in my mouth, I thought the second episode did a much better job with his depiction though. He's way more introspective and improvisational without serving as the episode's punching bag or butt of the joke, like we unfortunately see in the rest of the season. Darkcom and bounty hunters have a target on his neck, wanting the amulet that his mother gave to him as a child because it's one half of the key to opening the demon world. He was ratted out by Enzo after being interrogated by Darkcom, and I really love Dante's demeanor here. He has some pulse of the Dante we all know and love, with a mix of a new blood and swagger that Botch provides. There are some clever gags throughout this whole fight scene, some original, some not so much, but regardless, this is my favorite Dante performance of the whole season, and unfortunately this gumption doesn't last very long. What starts to unravel is what I was afraid would happen when Dante's voice was first revealed. He's just too similar to Nero. The inception of Nero's character was supposed to be a what-if scenario of sorts of if you took a Dante that didn't know of his demon heritage, making him less confident and therefore more human. So we've seen that shtick played out before, and it was even applied to Dante himself in the 2013 reboot, so it was very unnecessary to apply it again in ODMC. In this new iteration, he fancies himself a superhero to explain his resiliency, which I guess would be apropos to his youthful disposition, since at that age you have this entitled sense of invincibility, and it's not like his personality as a whole is a stranger to that. You could also argue that he's feigning ignorance of his demon heritage to keep a low profile or to distance himself mentally from his father, as we see him do in DMC3. But the Nero mirroring starts to get blatant at times. For instance, he and the other hostages are restrained inside of a plane that has been hijacked in episode 4. The White Rabbit wants to see Dante's power unleashed by sicking Agni and Rudra on him. Dante gets overpowered and sliced by his sword Rebellion across the chest. And obviously we knew that Dante's Devil Trigger was awakened by being impaled with Rebellion in Dante's Awakening. His DT isn't fully revealed yet, and he defends himself with what looks to be a striking resemblance to Nero's Devilbringer. He even emotes so much like Nero in this scene, which had to be an intentional nod, but in doing so it really blurs the lines with what's supposed to be a different character performance for Bosch. Makes me wonder what direction he got from Audi to either match the personalities of the two characters, or just do a not so subtly guised DMC5 Nero with the storyline of Dante. Either way, it doesn't do Dante's character justice or explore any meaningful avenues we haven't explored already. Even if that wasn't the case, Bosch definitely takes cues from his first voice acting role of Vash the Stampede from Trigun. A character that in some ways feels like the forerunner to Dante, a cool-mannered but sometimes silly character who also has a bounty on his head. But back to the airplane scene, it's so much less impactful for Dante's awakening, as it were, to be prompted by Agni and Rudra instead of Virgil of all people. A duo that served as a comic relief boss to be the ones to trigger such a crucial plot detail in the series feels like a punch to the gut. Although rather still, what's the worst offender in all this is how sidelined Dante feels at times in comparison to characters such as Mary. Don't get me wrong, Mary is a big proponent of this series, and I'm glad she's getting more screen time, and I intend on having a video with a big focus on her importance overall. But ODMC goes heavy on this overshadowing in a way that patronizes and emasculates Dante in a rather malicious way. This was admittedly done sparingly throughout DMC3, but it felt like each character had an equal share of the spotlight without jeopardizing their importance and integrity to the storyline. Dante was never bested or overpowered by Mary. He was taken down a peg by her a few times, sure, but never in a way that made him look completely impotent. If anything, it highlighted how powerful he was in the way that he brushed off anything she had to throw at him because it came off so playful. Mary alone physically arrests Dante multiple times in ODMC, and each time I'm like, come on, he is not that incompetent. I don't care how young and naive he's supposed to be in this timeline. But honestly, it's more of a factor of them making Mary too powerful for her own story's good, but I'll touch more on that in a later video. I can understand wanting to see Dante face struggles, resorting to having to harden his resolve, since he comes off as such an untouchable guy throughout most of the series. But the point in glorifying how capable he is physically is to more so zero in on his internal struggles and weaknesses, which contrasts his physical prowess perfectly. That's what makes him such a compelling character, not seeing how much of a beating that he can take for the sake of comedy and shock factor, which is a key detail I think ODMC has totally missed the mark on, at least in this first season. And I get first seasons of any shows can be rough, especially if you have a roadmap laid out that others can't see the entire vision. And I'm hoping to eat my words later down the road and be proven wrong once subsequent seasons roll out and we bear witness to an elaborate, overarching development for the character never seen before that we don't get to have the power of hindsight on just yet. But in the meantime, if you want an anime with a much more graceful Dante with dignity and tact and all, I would highly suggest checking out Madhouse's 2007 anime. It's actually canonical connective tissue that bridges the gap between the events of the first game and DMC 214, and was such a refreshing rewatch that it cleansed my palate after tasting the concoction of whatever odd DMC just brewed up for me. If you've made it to the end of the video, I just want to, of course, thank you for watching and go ahead and leave a like. If you really like my thoughts and opinions, make sure to use YouTube's share feature to share with others, since I've been falling out of favor with the algorithm for the better part of 2 years. Sharing would really help this channel out a lot. And if you aren't subscribed already, do so now and keep checking back in for my upcoming coverage of Audie's Devil May Cry that will have an eventual final verdict. Until then, peace.